Chapter 3: The Protests That Changed the Nation.
Memorial Day weekend is typically when people visit friends or family or do some outdoor activities to kick off the start of the summer while being mindful of the meaning of the holiday. COVID disrupted a lot of that in 2020, but that's not what people remember most about that day and that year. Our scene shifts to Minneapolis, Minnesota, a city that re-sparked a social movement in this country.
In Minneapolis tonight, tensions are high as 4 police officers have been fired after a man was pinned to the ground and died. The incident was caught on camera. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has the video, and we must warn you, the images are disturbing.
Yep, you probably didn't need NBC's Lester Holt to remind you. George Floyd's murder sent shockwaves throughout the country, so much so that COVID took a brief backseat in the news.
That was the switch from COVID for a while, a month or so, it seemed, that really changed, the media's focus, right? Because, everybody had been cooped up for months and everything, but, this was a call, to action, whether you were African American or white or whatever your ethnicity. You saw all types of people, get out and support and protest what had happened to George Floyd, regardless if there was a threat of, getting COVID.
For many, it was a call to action across the country. Police officer Derek Chauvin was eventually found guilty of second-degree murder. Just over a week after the horrifying event, Instagram servers were completely shut down by Blackout Tuesday, where many users simply posted a black square. Social media has been of great importance for journalists and continues to be so, but not having Instagram access for a day was hardly of concern to CBS News' Scott MacFarlane. Being front and center in Washington, D.C., health and safety was still on his mind, while of course bringing the necessary coverage.
It happened right at the Capitol itself. So for those of us who cover the Capitol, there was no way of avoiding that. It was hard not to be distracted by the concerns about public health. I know that wasn't the issue. I know that wasn't the story, but you're kind of walking around on eggshells covering a very dramatic thing, which you're like, is everybody here masked? Am I standing far enough away? And that's a hell of a distraction when something real, very powerful, very important is playing out in front of you. That's what I remember about it.
D.C. wasn't the only city that had major protests. Houston, Philadelphia, and Chicago all saw mass gatherings, putting the pandemic to the side. Covering the protests was quite necessary. WAER's John Smith says trying to cover it without getting sick, it was a wing and a prayer.
You know what? You just kind of take a leap of faith. You put on a mask and you hope for the best at that point. And that's what we did. I remember that, there was a protest in particular that I went to cover and really didn't want to be around people, because there were no vaccines or anything like that. I feel like there was somewhat of a concerted effort that people would wear masks. It was down in front of City Hall, and it was kind of led by the faith community and faith leaders. And there was the death of George Floyd that prompted that, in Minneapolis.
No matter where you worked or what outlet you worked for as a journalist, chances are your coverage of that time was all about the protests. That includes news, entertainment, and sports. Stephen A. Smith, one of ESPN's most recognizable figures, took a minute to discuss the severity of the situation.
I think we have to take these things into consideration and just crystallize what the moment entailed. You have a police officer with his knee on the neck of this black man who is handcuffed. He has him on his knee on his neck for over 8 minutes. 2.5 of those minutes was after there was no response from George Floyd. And what you don't see in that particular video, but another video from across the street was just displayed over other cable networks, was 2 of the 3 other officers were literally kneeling on his leg. This is the epitome of completely unnecessary. It is excessive. It is egregious. And as far as I'm concerned, every black man in America knows that police officer should have been arrested The day he was fired, he should have been put in handcuffs along with those officers. Of course, he should be charged with murder. Of course, those officers should be charged.
Smith is known for being a big personality and taking on controversies, but that was not the case here. Across the sports world, racial injustice became a much larger focal point. NBA superstar Giannis Antetokounmpo spoke at a street protest in Milwaukee.
This is our city, man.
Yeah.
This shit happen in our city, man. We gotta come out here and support. This is not the Bucks.
Nope.
This is just Sterling, Dante, Brew, Frank, Cam, the Nash, my brother, my family. This is the community, man. We want change. We want justice. Yes. And that's why we're out here. That's what we're going to do today. That's why we're going to march with you guys.
Boston Celtics forward Jaylen Brown drove all the way from Massachusetts to Atlanta to lead a street protest with his fellow NBA players.
No justice. No peace. No justice. No peace.
Being an NBA player don't exclude me from no conversation at all. First and foremost, I'm a black man, and I'm a member of this community, and I grew up on this soil, so I want to say that first and foremost, but it's a peaceful protest. We walking, and that's it.
No need to sugarcoat it. Moments like that do not happen every day in the sports world, and SiriusXM's Damon Amendolara recognized just how unique the situation was.
It was probably the most unique time to be on radio or in some type of long-form media outlet since the late 60s. Because when the world paused, other things started bubbling to the surface. Recognition about issues that had plagued society, racism, class divide, politics, a lot of things that are maybe identified during regular times of life, but were distracted by a million other things. There were no distractions anymore.
No distractions, to be sure. Easy to discuss on Sports Talk Radio, where having a personality is the key to being successful? No way.
I thought it was very challenging. Every day was very challenging. You had to walk a line of identifying these massive things that were happening in society, but also try not to be polarizing, because my job isn't to drive people away or to hemorrhage the audience. My job is to hopefully bring some illumination, to bring some context, to bring some wisdom to something that maybe people have questions about or are struggling with. So I thought it was massively challenging because you couldn't not identify and discuss it. And some people were better at it than others, but everybody was forced to do it.
Journalists had different strategies covering it, but let's hear McFarland answer the big overarching question. Did COVID get swept under the rug in the news because of the Black Lives Matter movement?
I don't know how much of that underwrote social justice protests and the unrest that came with it, but probably some connection there.
Like McFarland alluded to, the degree to which the social justice movement dominated coverage may not be known, but because of the impact of the protests, COVID might have taken a back seat for a bit. Regardless, Smith took a lot away from the coverage of it all.
You know, whenever it's a human interest type of story, you know, there's all of these sensitivities that are balanced, and I think it's very important to be a very good listener. And, you know, that becomes, you know, difficult in the moment to maybe assess, you know, what is fair and balanced when we're airing opinions and whether they go over the air or in print. But, you know, you can implicitly state that the people you're speaking to, these are their opinions. These are their thoughts.
People across the country were not shy to share their opinions and thoughts in the wake of the protests, whether it was Lester Holt the day after George Floyd's murder speaking with disgust, Instagram users simply posting the black square, professional athletes leading protests, or just your ordinary human learning more. The social justice movement impacted almost everybody. Harvard research deemed that the Black Lives Matter movement may be the largest wave of protests in recent American history. Social justice issues took center stage in the sports world again a few months later, but not before we saw a return to play.